Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. It's good to be with you, whether you're joining us on the radio, on the TV, over on the live streams on X and YouTube at Daily Signal. That's my personally favorite place because that way I can see all of the very literate, coherent, and intelligent comments that are always left on social media live streams. There's a lot to get to this evening because there was a lot that happened over the weekend. Some of it was amazing. Some of it was pure, unadulterated nonsense, and I cannot help but stick my hands in that mess and present it to you like a child bringing a mud pie in to show their mother. So, without further ado, Vice President J.D. Vance went to Munich. We already covered this. He went to Munich and he delivered a very simple speech. He said, Russia and China are indeed threats. These are problems in the international stage. So is violent fundamentalist Muslim migration. However, the biggest problem the European Union and associated states are facing are the lack of Western values that come from Judeo-Christian values that Europe used to be the bedrock for before they, crapped the bed. And this European state in particular that has once stood for values it's now just desisted into this nightmare, specifically cutting down on things like free speech. Because, God forbid anyone ever criticize those precious, fragile, fundamentalist Islamic individuals who commit large acts of violence. And that caused CBS and Margaret Brennan, who I guess was not tired of J.D. Vance wrecking her stuff last time on, being concerned about illegal immigrants and things like that, and whether, violent individuals might possibly not like being deported. Well, then Margaret Brennan decided to echo some very weird criticisms of the Vice President of the United States to Secretary of State Rubio. Now, we're going to pause already for just a second here. The glasses have to come off. If you're going to complain about a member of the Trump administration to one of the Trump administration, complaining about it to Marco Rubio is the stupidest thing, the worst choice that you can make. Why would you complain to him? Marco Rubio is articulate. Marco Rubio reads books. Marco Rubio actually knows basic history of not just Western civilization, but also Central and South America. He's got an excellent grasp on Middle Eastern history. And I've read a couple of his op-eds on Southeast Asian history, and they're pretty spot on. So Margaret Brennan, that doesn't stop her. Man, I tell you what, if she's going to shove her foot in her mouth, it's going to be a snow boot right down the throat. Here you go.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history.
Now, the mistake that Margaret Brennan made, and by the way, that's not an accident. That is a just blatantly horrific mistake to make live on air. To suggest that Nazi Germany used free speech to commit a genocide is one of the least intelligent things anyone has claimed on the air. No, there was no free speech in the Third Reich. There was no free speech, by the way, before the Third Reich. The Weimar Republic was known for being one of the most oppressive places. It was written about by many different nations' philosophers, by their critics, by their politicians. The United States heavily criticized the Weimar Republic for being extremely anti-human rights of any sort. And then when the fascist state came to power, guess what? You think that human rights, like free speech, increased? Absolutely not. But they can't actually criticize Europe for, not having particularly good policies on free speech, because CBS 60 Minutes, when they sit down and interview German prosecutors, the nation of Germany is to this day extremely anti-free speech.
It's illegal to display Nazi symbolism, a swastika, or deny the Holocaust. That's clear. Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in the internet, it stays there. If we are talking here face to face.
So, this is something that the legacy media is incredibly desperate for, is the abdication, is the removal of free speech from the rights fundamental to every American citizen and every individual around the world. Because right now, over in Europe, that horrible peon hellhole, there are individuals who are being arrested for posting memes. And by the way, not just like Nazi imagery or something that's like pro-Nazi, just memes that are critical of individuals the government has deemed to be untouchable. And 60 Minutes, of course, followed the state police of Germany around arresting individuals for acts of speech.
It's 6:01 on a Tuesday morning, and we were with state police as they raided this apartment in northwest Germany. Inside, 6 armed officers searched a suspect's home, then seized his laptop and cell phone. Prosecutors say those electronics may have been used to commit a crime. The crime, posting a racist cartoon online.
And by the way, was the cartoon even one that the individual made himself? No, just the act of sharing something that someone else doesn't like, that someone else finds racist, even if there's nothing inherently racist or phobic or whatever adjective you want to apply that you connotate as negative to this particular instance, that is enough for Europeans to cart you away to prison. And so when Vance goes over and says, you know what, you are being rotted out from the inside, and they go, oh no, how could you say, that's obviously pro-Putin. What? Putin doesn't care about Europe being anti-free speech. There's no free speech in Russia either. The entire European continent is a mess. The entire continent, and really the entire Asian continent, is also a mess when it comes to free speech. The United States has free speech enshrined in its Constitution for a reason, and the Second Amendment sticks around for when the First Amendment is under threat. And that stuff aside, we'll move on from the European liberals and their nonsense to move over to Canada's liberal nonsense. And we'll have to talk a little bit more in depth about the game itself. But the United States-Canada hockey game over the weekend, part of the nearing the end of that four-nation tournament, I gotta say, was one of the best games I've ever watched. Miracle on Ice, definitely in that same ballpark. I didn't get to watch it live. I did hear a couple of people in some of the group chats talking about how amazing the game was. I did go back and watch the entire game start to finish, and it was well worth my time. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show because things have happened since the weekend. Because the immigration customs enforcement operations have gotten a little bit more intense. Now, do I mean intense as though the immigration customs enforcement agents are doing something that is against the law or that is unethical? No, it's just the Blue City dumpster fires have moved to becoming fires on the immigration customs enforcement vehicles themselves. So here in Philadelphia, over the morning, I believe this morning, there was an immigration customs enforcement van on fire and was just starting to cook off certain parts of the van. Now, look, as a fan of the Philadelphia Eagles, who has been a fan, well, since the Indianapolis Colts couldn't field an offensive line or keep their quarterback from breaking his neck every other week, I'm quite acquainted with the violence and the riots that happen every day ending in Y in Philadelphia. But if you believe that Tom Homan and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement team of the Department of Homeland Security is going to be intimidated by a Molotov cocktail thrown. No individuals were inside the van at the time that the van was caught on fire. I'm going to be honest with you. You got another thing coming. Tom Homan is in the middle of opening and calling for investigations into Congress members who are giving advice to illegal immigrants in their district on how to avoid federal immigration law, which is a crime. You are not allowed to aid or abet crimes. That is not legal. That's not a thing. That's not an act of free speech. That's an act of giving someone tools to evade the law. That's not allowed. But is this what the media is focused on, these criminal acts? Allison, we'll go ahead and cut the commercial over on the radio side. This is the Tony Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal. I'm afraid not. That's not something that the media has chosen to focus on, because the media has all of their ire, all of their attention focused on the Department of Government Efficiency and the individuals that the Trump administration is cutting from the federal bureaucracy. Oh no, the individuals who, well after the rest of us went back to work, were tweeting that they didn't have any meetings scheduled for today. They tweeted this in 2023. So they just stayed in their jammies at home all day and watched Netflix. You were paying for their salary via your taxes. And some of these individuals in agencies like USAID got removed kind of abruptly, and then the media decided that this is the winning issue for the left. So they brought all the cameras in. Here's 60 Minutes interviewing a guy who worked over at USAID, and they're trying to play this up like, oh, this is just some horrible, terrible travesty. Oh, how could Trump be so cruel to these important, wonderful, amazing federal bureaucrats?
Randy Chester has worked for USAID 21 years under 4 presidents, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. He represents the agency workforce for the American Foreign Service Association. Doge arrived at USAID January 27th, and that same day, USAID's top 58 managers were given 45 minutes to get out.
They're top managers, guys. The middle manager. Won't someone think about the second assistant program manager? Oh, what about the human resources person that's been griping at people about pronouns for the last 4? Isn't someone going to think of Carl, the obese guy working in second assistant super advisory deputy management at USAID? So that's one line, which isn't flying with Americans. I seem to remember when thousands of hardworking men working on the Keystone Pipeline project were in the middle of said project when Biden scrapped the contract and they were all immediately out of jobs. They were in the process of working on the pipeline. There was no big sorrow piece from 60 Minutes then. And by the way, I do want to point this out. The other line that the Democrats have been shuffling forward like an awkward child at a family reunion, they have brought forward that, well, guys, come on. The operating budget for USAID in 2023 was only $38 billion. Do you know how big the U.S. budget is? That's true. You know, the United States budget is, in fact, several trillion dollars. It is. And a couple of billion, 38 billion, may not sound like a lot to those in the highest realms of power. But I would like to point out that the survivors of hurricanes Helene and Milton, the California wildfires, the Maui wildfires, and the various other natural disasters, those individuals that needed aid didn't see a drop of the USAID funding. And by the way, has USAID been used on domestic causes before? Yes, it has. The other suggestion that has been made by the left when this is criticized is, well, Congress allocated that money to USAID for those programs, and the president can't just change those. That's a Congress thing. No. I've read the budgets. I've searched through all of the sections of the budgets for the last decade pertaining to USAID. Do you know what I discovered? There is no section in the congressional budget that says anything about providing transgender comics to Peru or spreading atheism in Nepal, or any of the other various programs that have been uncovered by Elon Musk and the Doge team. So, just saying, it sounds like individuals who are watching Americans react in disgust to the audits. They're nervous because the funding's drying up. And that's just too dang bad. Well, there was a serious flight crash over in Toronto this weekend, actually, again, this morning. I'm going to try to play the video for those who are watching on the live stream. It is a truly, truly terrible crash. It looks like it was due to pilot error. Just landed way too hard and fast. The plane flipped over miraculously on the crash site. There were no individuals who were killed, thank God. And this has prompted a lot of very interesting questions, shall we say, about the aviation administration, as well as the industry as a whole. We're going to talk about that with Reagan Reese up next. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. Great to be joined by our friend Reagan Reese, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. A new article on the plane crash between an Apache helicopter and a rear jet American Airlines flight. It was a situation in which, God knows, we had 1,000,001 people coming out saying they know exactly what caused it right off the bat, all kinds of chaos. And then several plane crashes and incidents since have caused a lot more speculation. Now you've got at least a little bit more clarity on what happened right off of one of the main runways at Reagan. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that there are a lot of questions that are going to pop up in the coming months, but we did some reporting into the FAA over the last couple of decades and what pilots had been flagging as they were flying over the Potomac and crossing over these helicopters. And so I think our reporting is going to help kind of piece together what happened because we're still not completely sure if it was the helicopter's fault or the air traffic control's fault, was the plane off, whatever. So what me and my colleague Amber Duke found was that through public records, public reports, pilots had filed 220 reports of airborne incidences or near misses coming over the Potomac, landing in Reagan since 1988 till the present. Of those reports, about 30 of them were near misses between planes and helicopters, sometimes coming in with within 200 feet of helicopters. And there were all different reasons that these pilots cited. So, for example, the helicopter was too high. Air traffic control didn't even tell them that the helicopter was in the area or close to them until the pilot had already realized and taken corrective action themselves. Just the fact that maybe the helicopter shouldn't have been flying there in the first place. In one instance, there was even presidential movement that was at risk. And so all of these reports, I think, are going to be examined to help determine what went wrong with that American Airlines plane.
There's a real state of stagnation that's taken place in how we view a lot of our transportation infrastructure, not just with airlines, but also with trains, with the interstate system, with regard to port shipping, so more cargo and freight-based transportation. And this is a significant issue because we are increasing the amount of volume that some of these airports, some of these transportation hubs are taking in, while over time we've also been closing down or cutting off a lot of transportation options. And you're creating a situation in which you should not have a ton of helicopters and a ton of different airlines flying in on these razor thin margins at a time when, as someone with a very, very small private pilot who's only ever flown something as big as a Piper Cub, that, just to be quite clear here, it's like the Wild West. Mm-hmm. It really is. I mean, there is a very little that the towers actually do to manage takeoffs and landings, to, like you said, provide those warnings. And yes, of course, we can talk about how many pilots here and there or how many air traffic controllers here and there said what, but we've got a seriously outdated system, I think, on our hands.
Yeah, especially at Reagan National Airport. So Route 4 is the helicopter route that crosses the Potomac right near the runway where airplanes come. And so for years, we saw that pilots have been reporting the fact that Reagan is the most dangerous airport in the country. These are experienced pilots who are becoming afraid of landing in Reagan because they said air traffic control has so much traffic that they're pushing and pushing and pushing. And so one example I like to cite for this is that there was what we think was potentially the vice president crossing over the Potomac in 2017. So that would have been Pence. And all of the other aircrafts were holding in the area. But for whatever reason, air traffic control launched some departures at this helicopter, causing a near miss. And it seems to be, from what we see from these pilots reporting over the past couple of decades, was because air traffic control just has so many aircrafts to get in and out, and that potentially they're taking risks that they shouldn't be taking.
People don't realize the amount of traffic that is coming in and out of these key airports. And Reagan, of course, vastly expanded from its original size, thank God. You improve the number of runways, you improve the timetable so more aircraft can take off and can land at one time, but you cannot increase the amount of airspace in the vicinity. And additionally, I'm going to say I have not seen them building more towers and adding additional floors to these towers. Obviously, I know staffing is an issue. We need to come up with some kinds of more sophisticated kinds of systems to manage air traffic, because it is becoming not just a problem, as you said, with direct accidents, but the number of near misses is like playing with fire. And it was only a matter of time before someone was going to get burned as it is. And now we're looking at this outdated infrastructure in an age when China is surging ahead in, trying to put a lot of, resources into infrastructure. What do you see from those inside the Trump administration and what they are trying to do to maybe upgrade transportation as a whole, maybe over in Duffy's department?
Yeah, well, if I could add something just to your point about how the airport is overloaded and how we have outdated systems, et cetera. So the FAA, when we were writing this story about these reports, we reached out to them and asked them, can you tell us how you addressed all of these 220 reports, which, by the way, these are just public reports. Behind the scenes, privately, I'm sure that number is much greater. I've heard rumblings that the number is much higher. And they, just sent me back this COMSI PR statement. And I followed up again and asked another question. Same question, still no response from them. But what we did see from the FAA immediately following the crash at Reagan was that now only select helicopters are able to cross that Route 4 across the Potomac, military helicopters, medical helicopters, the president's helicopter, et cetera. And when they are crossing, airplanes are to hold in the sky and are not supposed to be landing at that runway. And so finally, it seems like they took this action that pilots really had been telling the FAA to take for years in these reports. And so that's something that the Trump administration, I think, has to address as well, is how are you going to manage this traffic? Because God forbid the president crosses over there and one air traffic controller or a pilot makes a mistake, and you have a even greater national crisis on your hands.
And not only is that kind of a crisis going to be on the hands, but once you see those particular instances where there are crashes, where there are near misses, because in my opinion, a near miss only was a near miss because of a last minute human correction that likely saved a point of tragedy. Or again, something else, the hand of God acting in that particular instance. Near misses are a black mark on the situation because it was heading for some kind of a problem. That near miss doesn't change the infrastructure. So you ever had a moment where you've made a mistake and then something bad almost happened and then you resolved from that moment, I'm going to be more careful?
Yes.
Well, there are a lot of instances where these pilots are already being careful and the infrastructure simply cannot hold all of them in the same space. It doesn't matter how careful you are eventually you are going to get a moment where you're going to have a severe updraft. It's going to cause problems with maneuverability when you get close to a landing. Just a busy day at Reagan, where you've got a lot of helicopter traffic with the military or with diplomatic officials, medical flights, as you said. We need to start looking at upgrading the infrastructure overall now, because pretty soon the near misses are going to be a lot less near.
We actually talked to a commercial pilot who kind of helped us with this story and helped guide us along, because to access the records and the reports that we needed to access, this commercial pilot explained it to us that it's very complicated, and they kind of hide it in a way that won't be easily accessible by the public. And how this pilot explained it to us with all of these near misses, like you're talking about, is that they're basically stacked like Swiss cheese, like a Swiss cheese model. And that if you plug one of those holes, everything is going to be okay and nothing is going to be wrong. And so a bunch of things could go wrong, but as long as you make sure one thing doesn't go wrong, like telling the pilot, for example, that the helicopter is too high, or getting the helicopter to adjust down low, even though the plane is coming in the wrong route, et cetera, that is kind of how air traffic control, how this airspace works, which I think is really, as someone with flight anxiety, something that's really, really scary. Is a bunch of things could go wrong, and as long as one thing doesn't go wrong, then everybody's going to be okay. I don't know if that's a system that can hold up well, especially now with a bunch of stress on it.
Again, as someone who's only flown small craft and have never flown in a passenger situation, I've worked in Indianapolis Tower controls a large area, predominantly where I had flown in, and I was always terrified of the landing procedure and about getting too low too early. Now, for me, it was because of an irrational fear of power lines, but that's another tale for another time. But also, I was always nervous about the inability of the tower to recognize other craft in the area. And this is at a small airport in a place outside of Newcastle, Indiana, in which I was getting ready to take off. And then a plane announced final approach. You're supposed to circle twice, then come down to land. And the guy just announced final approach, and he flew right over the top of my plane. Terrified me half to death. Taxied. I then taxied and had a spirited discussion with the landing pilot. But that's just at a small airport in the middle of nowhere. The idea that these kind of near misses are becoming prevalent, they're becoming common due to a multiplicity of factors. This is something that needs to be addressed, because if you can't rectify this, then you're going to start losing competent pilots, because they are competent enough to know that air traffic around core airports like O'Hare, like DCA, I don't know why it's escaping me, in New York, near Newark, for example, LaGuardia, there it is, are not going to land at those airports because they know the risks associated.
Yeah, definitely. These pilots, when they file these reports of near misses or an airborne incident, this is not because they feel like they should flag that for something, or, that could have been a concern or whatever. It is because they are genuinely terrified and have known that something had gone very, very wrong if they did not take corrective action, or if they had not identified the problem. And so all of these reports are not something to be, passed by or looked over. These are experienced pilots that are very, very concerned and are, yes, expressing, fright landing in Reagan National Airport. And a lot of these pilots, cited their years and years of experience and that they'd never had something like this happen. But then they fly into Reagan and they're terrified and they feel like there's a million things that they have to be worried about. Reagan also is just a difficult airport to land in to begin with. It's right on the water. There's always weather issues. And then not to mention there's restricted airspace all around you that you have to be conscious of.
Thread a needle, that you're also threading that needle with other pilots in the same area. The runways are not lined up with the runways are not lined up at Reagan in the right, the right axis based on the compass. So at 0, at 30, at 60, at 90. They're not. And so that's an additional nightmare. I can put it in this context, really, that people in both of our audiences might pick up on. If you ever been in a medium-sized town that started to grow and the roads didn't grow with the medium-sized town, and so as the town started filling up with new subdivisions, new apartment buildings, you started to look, it's going to be a real pain to drive here in about 6 months. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah, totally. I'm thinking of a tunnel in my hometown that is still one way, and there's like lines and lines of cars always trying to get to this tunnel, taking turns going through, and that's very much how it feels. I even think of, I cross over from Arlington to the city very frequently, which goes right by Reagan Airport, and you can always pick out all of the planes in the sky. And I'm always fascinated by how many planes there are all coming in right after each other. There's 6, 7, sometimes, coming in, landing. And meanwhile, as you're driving over that bridge, there's planes taking off. And it's crazy how many planes there are.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Good to be with you. There are, I really was not expecting to have the just all-out brawl between the United States and Canada. But it does two very, very important things. First of all, to have an event like this. Number one, it reminds Canadians that they only exist at our good pleasure. Really, I only Canada's just silly, goofy, liberal, grating, whatever. That only is allowed to persist because the United States agrees to do all of its defense and its economy and pretty much everything else, and for the Canadians. And number two, it also encourages people to watch more hockey. Hockey's a fantastic sport. I am very sad that I live in a state in which there is only a minor league team, and I don't get to see the all-out, action-packed, just beautiful professional level, international level hockey violence all the time. So while Canada in this particular international tournament thought that because of Trump's tariff threats that the best move to do there while the United States was playing against Canada in Montreal, that the Canadian team would boo the U.S. national anthem, boo the Star-Spangled Banner, and the individual in uniform singing it, a very stupid move on the part of the Canadians. That indeed was the call that they chose to make. I certainly wouldn't have done that, but hey, that's just what some might consider to be a bit of common sense. Well, here's what that looked like, and the results following were fantastic. Now, after the Canadians booed the U.S. national anthem, there was, I believe, something that has not happened in at least NHL history, but of course, the particular national tournament here, this nation's face-off, I don't think this has happened there either. There were then 3 fights in the first 9 seconds. So, Team USA players Matthew and Brady Tkachuk, and then JT Miller, each as soon as the puck was dropped, they immediately just threw down the gloves and went right for the Canadian that was in front of them. Because if there is one thing that can heal about 70% of the divide in the United States, it is, though the United States, we have our little cultural issues, and there are moments where an individual may or may not be a particular fan of certain policies in the United States or how things are going. The second that another country insults the United States, there is an eagle that screams inside of every red-blooded American. And to watch the Tkachuk brothers as well as Miller immediately go gloves down. Well, it was some good stuff. So here, let's watch some of these fights break down, because it was one of the more beautiful moments of an international tournament.
Gloves right away.
Boom, hit.
Yep.
Hit.
Sam Bennett, Brady Tkachuk.
Down on the ground.
One Miller. And Miller.
And another fight. Boom, boom.
Other way, speed cycle into the zone, flipping it through.
And then the USA tied it up 1-1. And by the way, just in case you were wondering, we don't have all of the clips lined up because, we would be here all the ding-dong day. As the Americans were just heading right into the penalty box, just time. The reaction from the rest of the team is just big, toothy grins. And then the United States proceeded over the rest of play, then to move from that 1-1 tie all the way to a 3-1 victory for the United States.
As Team USA has answered. And away goes Larkin. It's a 2-1. Larkin scores!
Beautiful.
Larkin, and Team USA has the lead. Down the ice. Larkin with the open net. Across to Gensel. Scores! Jake Gensel's got his second. And a clincher here for Team USA.
Canada. I actually hadn't gotten a chance to look at the Canadian bench. Just depressed beyond all belief. The memes that followed were indeed fantastic. If you haven't actually watched the game, I would encourage you to go find the game and watch it. It is actually worth sitting through, because to be reminded that the United States is unequivocally better than every other nation on Earth combined is one of the best things that an American can do and should do. It is, in fact, your duty as an American. It's your duty as an American just to rub the dirt into the wound of complete international abysmal failure that the United States has been paying for in the faces of the sad, rightless liberals whom can't even rely on free speech or the Second Amendment in their various countries. So, fantastic stuff. That is, by the way, how one should respond to the national anthem of the United States being booed. Is 3 fights in the first 9 seconds of play. Well, I know that we just got off of that interview with Reagan Reese. It got cut just a bit short because of a technical glitch. We do have something that is fantastic. By the way, we'll make sure that the rest of the interview with the Daily Caller's Reagan Reese is played in full over on the podcast version of the show, which we'll make sure to link in the description. The ending result of I shouldn't say the ending result. The video of the crash in Toronto, the Delta flight that landed too hard and then flipped over, the video had barely been put out before the cast members of The View, the angry old sagging vultures that they are, descended on the event, the crash on the Canadian runway, again in Toronto, to complain about Elon Musk and Doge. So here's Whoopi Goldberg, and this may be a little bit redundant, but acting like a petulant fool.
I have been panicking over all this insanity with these planes.
Yeah.
You know, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. Like, so let's start with the string of mass firings by Elon Musk's Doge. They say, yeah. Doge. Has sparked a lot of chaos, confusion, and fear, because Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is defending the firing of 400 FAA workers. But former Secretary Pete Buttigieg slammed the firings of employees who control communications, radio, computer systems, all given all the confusion.
Okay, real quick note here. First of all, it's hilarious watching Pete Buttigieg now that he's prepping for his run of Michigan Senate or governor or whatever he's doing in Michigan. Because when Pete Buttigieg was the actual Secretary of Transportation, he didn't give a darn about any of the transportation disasters that he presided over, and then made worse by the lack of federal response. So that's a swing and a miss there. But I also will point out the crash happened in, what was that one place? Oh yeah, Toronto. The FAA does not, in fact, staff the airports in Toronto. That's not a thing. And just to make things clear, if it was a mechanical issue, the airlines in the United States do in fact run their own mechanics operations. There is not an FAA, like a state provided maintenance board. Now they have a lot of regulations and restrictions, and there was a lot of subsidized bloat and disaster. I believe someone in the comments pointed out, this is 100% correct, that up a couple of years ago, in fact, we found that a lot of the aviation industry was still operating on decades-old Windows software, like ages-old operating system, Windows 95 and 98, to govern like half of the scheduling timetables for American flights in this country. Oh man, gee, I wonder what the problem could be. Well, man, when you send billions and billions and billions of dollars to other countries, there seems to be very little left for projects in the United States. You really want to ask some questions. Maybe you should take a look at why Pete Buttigieg spent umpteen billions of dollars on electric charging ports that only 7 were built from. I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe putting a massive focus on hiring a diverse and equitable line at the FAA instead of making it an agency people want to work for. I mean, hey, maybe that might have something to do with it. Just throwing darts out here, which appear to have the same accuracy now as Tower Command for landing aircraft in the continental United States and Canada in this particular instance. We're going to be back to talk a little bit more about the response from, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elon Musk about these aviation disasters, and then a little bit of tea leaf reading because news never slows down. That's going to be with Rebecca Downs. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Stick around.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Don't tell Kurt Schlichter, but my favorite person at Town Hall isn't Kurt. It's actually Rebecca Downs, who's joining us for the Down Low, because Rebecca, we are constantly in a flurry as individuals you're the web editor over there. You're constantly keeping track of the news, writing more tip sheets than a local bartender, pun very much intended. I'm constantly frustrated by the squad, by the shenanigans spilling onto social media. And thank the Lord, AOC is tweeting because it keeps us in business. How you doing?
Doing all right. Thanks so much for that intro, Tony. So as I'm sure you and your viewers or listeners have heard, there has been a lot of chatter about Vice President J.D. Vance and the remarks he gave in Munich over the weekend. And AOC kind of did a twofer with her post, because if you see her post from, it was this morning, Tuesday morning, she calls out Vance for, he's actually going after Mehdi Hassan, who he calls a dummy. Not the worst thing you could call somebody, especially an anti-Israeli commentator.
It's potent without being vulgar. So I have this thing that I've started doing where, to refrain from swearing, I will just pick random nouns and to refer to people as. So for example, and I'm sure we'll get to this with AOC, I called her a melon today. Like, you absolute melon. So he calls him a dummy.
The randomness of it.
Great slap. Please continue.
Yeah. So she posted JD Vance, who said, "Yes, dummy, I think there's a difference between not giving a reporter a seat in the White House press briefing room and jailing people for dissenting views. The latter is a threat to free speech. The former is not. Hope that helps." Clever exclamation point. So he was responding to Hassan, who was all up in arms about the AP, the Associated Press, being denied a seat at the White House with the press briefing room and Air Force One. They're still going to have their press credentials. Those spots are just going out to other outlets now.
Yeah, they're like, look, we're obviously going to give out outlet. You guys are being annoying after spending the
with
last
the Gulf of
administration.
America.
Right. With the last administration, they changed their editorial policy on behalf of the White House. I think Bradley Devlin, our politics editors, covered this like 3, 4, 5 times. I did an article about it
as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not like there's any shortage of times the AP has changed standards for left-leaning administrations. So
true.
Variable standards doesn't stop AOC from doing these attempted dunks, because she then tries to hit Elon Musk. Yeah, she says she calls him a liar. You lied to the world in Munich. If this administration believed in free speech as you claimed, its leaders wouldn't be threatening members of Congress with criminal investigations for educating the public of their constitutional rights. And that's her pitching a fit because, as you outlined, she was teaching illegal immigrants how to avoid ICE, which is illegal.
Yeah, Tom Holman's coming after her for that now. My colleague Madeline Leisman is covering that, as he should.
My, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions.
Right, and then cry about it and claim the victim. So I get the sense from that tweet, especially since it's a quoted one, she's trying to get so much in here about Musk. She's trying to defend, inadvertently or not, far be it from me, though, to give her too much credit, trying to defend Hassan, which is, be careful with that move. And she's also trying to go after Musk. She's trying to make herself to be out the victim. She's trying to take the side, not of the United States, and thank God we have a First Amendment and free speech here, but Germany and the free speech concerns they have. We've been covering all over Town Hall that 60 Minutes episode that aired on Sunday night. Could not have been more perfect timing, right? So you have JD Vance goes to Munich on Friday. His speech was getting a lot of remarks, a lot of chatter, a lot of reaction, because he warned accurately that there are free speech rights concerns in Europe. That applies to Germany, that applies to the UK. In the UK, especially, we've seen a lot of peaceful pro-lifers arrested, found criminally liable for merely praying, sometimes in their own home. There's a letter that's circulating around that they send out to people in Scotland. And then the 60 Minutes episode focused on Germany in particular.
I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah.
That is one of the most insane things. So again, we talked about this a little bit in the first segment of the show, that CBS, in their grand response after suggesting to Secretary of State Rubio that it was actually free speech that gave the Nazis power, which is, again, look, if you want to say that free speech can empower hate speech, which can encourage violence, that's one argument, but that's just not what happened in Nazi Germany. Before that in Weimar Germany, like the Weimar Germany threw Hitler in prison and then would not let him speak in public for years afterward, which gave the rise to the Nazi Party because
radicalized him.
What's he saying? They won't let him speak. So maybe is there truth behind it? Free speech is great because it gives air to stupid arguments that then I and you and many of our other colleagues can then pimp slap like Will Smith on stage. I mean, it is a wonderful thing to destroy, as Secretary Rubio did, as Vice President Vance did, these silly, censorious ideas. But it is, I got to tell you, the timing is great. The timing of all of this is something to behold, which brings us over to one last thing that I wanted to get your comments on. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we talked about this a bit today with Reagan Reese from the Daily Caller, their White House correspondent. AOC is suggesting that if Elon Musk has a problem with commercial airlines, then he should fly private because of an issue that Elon Musk suggested about the FAA. And I wanted to catch your take on this because we deal so much with the squad's stupidity. Does AOC know that the FAA controls both public flights and private flights in this country?
I would guess not. I guess she's trying to go for a hot moment. a hot, spicy Latina tweet there.
I gotta say, it's landing about as well as her crying outside the parking lot entranceway of the border facility.
Those memes were from years ago, and I'm still seeing them pop up.
So do you think that, if Crockett and Summer Lee are trying the whole racial reparations angle, you've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez trying the dunking on the conservatives angle, and then the rest of them appear to be doing this anti-billionaire capitalism bad maneuver. Are any of those strategies new for the left, or am I crazy in thinking they're trying the same thing for the 47th time?
So they are trying the same thing, it appears. And it's amazing for you and I to cover and discuss, right? Because I don't want to get too excited for 2026, especially what it is that you say, Tony. Nobody snatches defeat from the jaws of victory like the Republican Party.
That's
but
right.
This is a good time for the Republican Party. I love talking about how that Quinnipiac poll from late last month showed the Democratic Party is at an all-time unfavorable rating among Americans, 57-31%.
All right, I am here to rain just a bit on the parade, just a smidgen, just a hint, a tizzy, just a small scrumption here. That's not a real
Fair
word,
enough.
but it is now.
Sure.
I gotta say, I would be a little bit happier if the Republicans continue. Now, the Senate, actually, believe it or not, the Senate and the House seem to be getting into the budget stuff as someone kind of predicted that they would. But the White House and the presidential advisors, company, friends, and pals, we do seem to be getting drawn into the weeds a little bit over the personal lives of people, whether it's Eric Adams or whether it's Elon Musk. Do you think from your coverage of this that this is going to seep into the general feeling about the Trump presidency thus far, or is it just going to, I don't know, just kind of drift into the ether of random internet garbage?
So we hope for the latter, right? But that's
I know we hope for, but I'm asking about your gut.
I don't think those are the times we live in, unfortunately. Everybody's online 24/7. You and I kind of have to be for our jobs, right? And for the fields we're in.
And that's true, but sometimes, it's like
I wouldn't take anything for granted.
Remember the Kill Tony Puerto Rican situation before the election? They're like, oh, this guy made a joke about Puerto Rico, and so therefore it's really going to cripple Trump with Puerto Ricans. And it did absolutely nothing. So could we be looking at another situation here? Like, is anyone really looking to see, oh man, Elon Musk had a kid? Like, I feel like it's already starting to wash out of the media ecosphere.
It could. What I was gonna say is never. I'm very hesitant to take anything for granted, in the sense of hoping that it will go away. I don't think it will affect Musk's job or role with Doge, and Democrats already hate him as it is anyway. So
I'm not really concerned about what it is that, again, like some Senate committee member is going to complain about to the media. No one's really paying that much attention, but I do want to make sure that at this point, we chatted about this with a former CIA operative, that when momentum stalls, that's when things get a little bit interesting, because then you start to see, you ever been ice skating?
Yes.
You know, when you slow down just a little bit when you're ice skating, you lose the momentum, and it's all of a sudden it's like your body realizes you're balancing on two blades and you start doing this and throwing arms out. I just don't want to see those that are currently trying to do the work of auditing the government, moving forward American policy, if they lose momentum because of silly social stuff. I don't want to start seeing the arms flail, because the arm, you might actually reach out and like smack a baby, just to use the common. I'm really trying to stick hard to my analogy here.
I'm not worried so much about Musk as I am Democrats using that to their advantage, although far be it from them to do something that actually bears results. Then I am. So yeah, I kind of wish the story wasn't there in the way that it was, but I really think it could go either way. I think we should see when another poll comes out, or it's been a few weeks. And I just think can't take anything for granted, good or bad.
I do hope that there are individuals like Trump's chief of staff who just has no nonsense for anyone, anytime, anywhere.
Yes, Susie Wiles.
I'm really hoping that Wiles has her wiles about her, and is again just really full of puns today. So I think that we've about covered most of the basics in the news. Rebecca Downs, the web editor over at townhall.com. It's good to bring in again people who are always plugged in. So those folks out there not steeping in the bathwater of politics all day, get a bit of an idea of what the current political ecosystem is at like 30,000 feet,
Yeah. Oh, I know.
I feel you. All right. Well, we'll be back with you in just a little bit. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, joined by my good friend Stephen Kent from the Consumer Choice Center for a little bit of Watchin. So in this particular week, Stephen, what you watching, or in this case, reading?
Well, good to see you, Tony. It's Tuesday, so always excited to talk a little entertainment in Hollywood with you. I have been getting up to speed on Apple TV's show Severance. Have you taken some time to watch this program yet on Apple?
I have seen at least 5 reels over on Instagram. Different people in our circles are talking about it, but I haven't watched Severance yet. Tell me, maybe why should I?
Well, Severance is a show about a group of people who are trapped in some sort of, office, workplace-like environment. And it is meant to be very much a dystopian sci-fi thriller. But, this show actually is steeped in the works of C.S. Lewis. This is the writer behind the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah, that's quite a claim to make.
It is quite a claim, but it's impossible to unsee once you notice that in season 2, episode 4 of Severance, titled "Woe's Hollow," the 4 main characters go into a snowy wonderland through a door, all wearing fur coats, and they encounter a villain in all white, flanked by a tiny person. It's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe replayed throughout this show, and the rest of the show also models the philosophical insights of C.S. Lewis and some very famous books such as The Abolition of Man, really just looking at dystopian futures in which our humanity is undermined by our technology. This is like a show that's actually incredibly deep, and I think anyone in your audience who's interested in this stuff should take time to watch Severance on Apple.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. Of all the things that I expect you to say when you tell me why I should watch a show, the themes of C.S. Lewis and really great questions that aren't undermined themselves by the show, that's not usually one of them, but that's pretty compelling.
That's what we do here on What You Watchin'. But I got to tell you, I'm excited to maybe, Tony, just saying, get back to my regular Disney diet in 2025 to 2028, at least, if this company is going to get a little bit less awful over the next coming years. DEI.
It's a high order there.
DEI is on the rollback within Disney. This came out last week that Disney Plus is rolling back some of their really in-your-face trigger warnings that they started slapping onto classic films and TV shows from 2021 onward. And they are also looking at completely dismantling a lot of their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within Disney, meant to tell stories of underprivileged groups within Disney, which basically just means less straight white people, I guess.
Yeah, worst thing you can possibly film. Understandable. So what's the progress on that, at least looking like so far? I know that some companies are kind of rolling things back immediately. Some are really kind of dragging their heels on it. Disney's got a little bit more field testing on what people are and aren't willing to spend money on or to watch. Or maybe visit if you think the parks as well.
Well, I have a piece over at the Daily Wire, which you can check out in their opinion section, that I think would interest everyone in your audience. I mean, in the same week that Disney announced the rollback of their different DEI commitments, they finally debuted Luke Skywalker, of all people, at Disney parks as a character in the Star Wars park experience known as Galaxy's Edge. This is hard to believe, people, but Luke Skywalker has not been at Disney parks as a character that you can take your picture with or get your kids to go see. They have forced for, almost 10 years now, the new characters from the Disney Star Wars trilogy on tourists going to Disney World, whether their
all you could
dads
see
wanted to
was
see them or
Rey.
not. Yeah, Rey.
It's Rey. Everywhere. Like no other characters in Star Wars, but Rey. And then Chewie. So like, then I said have Chewie, again, kind of sort of there, but I just, every time I've seen pictures of people actually going to checking out the Galaxy's Edge stuff, because, Disney's got all the money. So, building out a huge layout in their park is kind of cool, to see just how far you can go with set design in a theme park where it's got to be durable.
Oh, it's super cool. And I've argued for years that, Galaxy's Edge is an incredible installment to Disney. It allows you to role play within Star Wars and have fun, but they picked the wrong stinking timeline, Tony. Nobody wants to operate in Star Wars after the time of the Return of the Jedi. They want their picture with Darth Vader, Stormtroopers, Luke Skywalker, and Han Solo. And for some reason, Disney committed to making people take their pictures with characters they'd never heard of. It's sort of a remarkable change, but I think Disney might actually go to lengths not to reskin Galaxy's Edge, but to inch that timeline back a little bit so that consumers actually want to go to the Star Wars park and see their favorite character.
It is kind of a crazy concept that is an entertainment consumer agency that you might make an effort to give the consumers who are repeatedly coming back to your organization what it is that they want. And obviously, again, it's not just when you're writing news stories, it's not just about, bringing back the same cameos and the same key jangling and that kind of a thing. But when you go to a theme park, you should be able to see the characters of the theme at the park. That makes sense to me. I don't know. That's kind of an out there idea, but might be the easy high ground for one to take.
Well, I think, Tony, that is the essence of what happened with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this sort of anti-racism mind virus that took this country over after the summer of 2020, was that the belief was consumers wanted certain things and they were wrong to want them, that their minds had to be changed, and you had to deny people access to stories they loved and narratives that they respected from their childhoods. There's a character who appears at the Galaxy's Edge Park at Disney, who is, like a black female character with blue hair, of course. And you would not know who this person is because she's a character from one of the novels, the Star Wars books. And this is who you parade around the park.
Wait, which novel is she from?
You're putting me on the spot. The Squadron, Squadron book. It was about the...
Wait a minute.
It's a V. Marathi.
So it's not even a character that's like from one of the novelizations or one of the direct tie-in novels, but they just from like some random Squadrons book. That's embarrassing.
It's V. Marathi from the Black Spire books, and she appears in some of their other books just about rebel pilots. This is a person who no one has ever heard of before, but is there nonetheless, but not Luke Skywalker. And this is just sort of speaks to the broader narrative that Disney has been trying to shelve and put away its most famous and beloved heroes to try to make people want something else. And they just don't. This is why Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi was so abrasive to so many people, because they were trying not just to make Rey and the new Star Wars movies a likable character. They were trying to build her up by standing on the shoulders or the graves of Luke Skywalker and Han Solo.
It kind of reminds me just a little bit, and I just now, because when you have kids, it's very slow getting through a lot of the shows and movies that you want to watch, oftentimes, especially when they're little. So my wife and I finally got to finish Endgame, and I noticed in the beginning, I recalled that scene where they're at this diner where the Hulk is at. And the kids come up and they want to take a picture with the Hulk, but they don't want to take a picture with Ant-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, hey, don't you guys want to take a picture with me? I'm Ant-Man. And the kid's like, no, I don't know who you are. It's like, the people want what they want, man. Like they don't want to take a picture with these random people.
I'm delighted to hear that someone else who loves watching movies has also just now finished Endgame. I could not finish that movie when it first came out, and I've avoided it for years.
I think it's the second time I'd seen it. It was a pretty decent end to the series. I will say that also watching Captain Marvel not being stronger and more amazing and super duper than everyone and actually getting wrecked by Thanos was also enjoyable the first time I saw it, because we almost got hit with the legacy of Brie Larson, which no one asked for. Again, at the height of the DEI, strong, powerful, she can do anything she sets her mind to. You go, girl. Like the age of the Mary Sue does appear to be coming to a bit of a close. Praise God.
Yeah, I've mentioned it a couple times on your program. That's why I've really enjoyed the show Lioness on Paramount Plus by Taylor Sheridan, starring Zoe Saldana. This is a CIA operative woman who's just like operating in some of the worst places in the world, but she's vulnerable. She's emotional. She cries. She's actually feels fear and terror. And when she's in near-death situations, she can barely catch her breath. She's normal.
Right. She doesn't just have the instant perfect key and witty response for everything. She makes mistakes, and there are consequences that she has to bear. I mean, that kind of thing matters, because then you can actually insert yourself into her shoes, which is supposed to be what at least a lot of storytelling is about.
That's exactly right. We could be turning the corner on a really, really bleak chapter in pop culture.
Which means that there's got to be new movies coming out soon. Maybe even movies that criticize China.
Oh.
Or is that one too far?
Well, according to Tom Cotton, we might not ever be able to do that. He's got a new book out today, actually, called 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Maybe you should get him on your show to talk about this, but his op-ed in the New York Post is making a little bit of a splash, and it's just outlining how bizarre it is that from the 1990s to today, it's become completely verboten in Hollywood to make movies criticizing the CCP or casting them in an unfavorable light. I grew up in the 1990s, and this was a time when movies like Kundun and 7 Years in Tibet were coming out back to back from major Hollywood studios. You can't make those movies anymore.
Now, we've talked about Kundun on the show before, haven't we? Like one of these two movies, either the Tibet movie or Kundun, we've discussed, because this isn't the first time you and I have backslapped China, but at least slapped back at China. But at least, I don't know. I'm always eager to see an op-ed criticizing Hollywood's deep love affair, from sports teams to news channels to full-scale movie production when it comes to China.
Well, it's all based in a preliminary obedience to China and the CCP.
That's a great way to put it.
It's preliminary obedience. It's basically Hollywood studios just bending over backwards and censoring American movie makers and censoring American scripts based on how they may or may not be perceived. It's speaks to, I think, how conservatives often on college campuses, even though there is a spirit of censorship on college campuses, tend to self-censor more than they are actually censored. And Hollywood does that exact thing. They crack down on scripts and on stories that Americans want to tell out of fear of what could happen with the CCP. And then you end up with no free expression coming from the United States.
I think that you're really, really dead on there. Stephen Kent from the Consumer Choice Center, thanks for joining us for another What You Watchin'. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. Good to be with you here on this last bit of bonus tonus for the day. I am not going to be at the Conservative Political Action Conference CPAC this week, though a lot of our colleagues are. In fact, I'm not going to tell you that I'm getting a little annoyed by all of the various texts constantly pestering me, asking me, are you going to be at that? No, I'm not. I'm staying here in Indiana. However, I am going to be cutting throughout the day as well as during the show each evening of the conference to many of our friends over in the CPAC media rows. We got a lot of great friends that we're going to be getting some insights from. Of course, President Trump, Vice President Vance expected to speak. There is a lot of momentum that is currently coursing through the administration as well as Congress. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Senator Thune and beginning the budget reconciliation process, excluding the Trump tax cut continuing, leaving that for a later date. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Additionally, we've got a little bit that is worth talking about regarding Elon Musk and parenting and having another kid and whether that matters, at least as far as the cultural implications to Republican momentum. We're going to give it another day to rest because I'm still not convinced, even though we had a great conversation with Rebecca Downs about this, whether or not we're going to see it have any sizable impact. So far, it appears that there have been a series of soft targets available to the left. Open right there. All they got to do is swing the sledgehammer at it. And one of two things happens. Number one, they start to swing the sledgehammer. And then they get distracted about halfway through the swing and then just like try mid-swing to correct it and they end up swinging at something else and it's really embarrassing. You've seen this with Doge. They started out by saying, well, actually, Elon Musk is the president, and then that didn't really work. And they were, oh, well, there's not any waste or fraud going on. Actually, it's good spending. Oh, actually, it's just different spending. Actually, it's not there at all. It's all fake so far. Nothing you've seen is real. And then, oh, Elon Musk is going to have your private data. You can do that, which is what the Democrats have been really struggling with. Or you can miss the very soft targets for completely unrelated and just goofy, silly targets. Like J.D. Vance speaking in Munich. Attacking one of the most competent members, one of the most, I would say, ideologically consistent members of the administration over very basic American, like, conservative speeches? All right. There are other places that one might swing the sledgehammer, but if that's really where you want to go for, hey, don't let me stand in your way. So we'll talk about that as well. Want to take another look at what many are doing in the political atmosphere, whether it's David Hogg on the left or whether it's like Scott Pressler over on the right in Pennsylvania to prepare for midterms, because it's promising to be quite the showdown. That said, I will be on for Tony Katz tomorrow from noon to 3 on that particular syndication network. And then we're going to swing right over to the Tony Kinnett Cast. It's going to be a full day tomorrow. I hope you're ready. Make sure when you get up in the morning, do some stretches, do your reading, and most importantly, please do not suggest that free speech gave the Nazis the power to commit a genocide. Get some great sleep, good diet, good exercise, but please don't be illiterate. With that said, thank you very much for tuning in. This has been the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC, produced by Allison Lemons, Lou Scataglia, and Daniel Elmore. Take care.